we go into Q&A. Councillor Zakim, welcome back.
Madam Chair, thank you for having me. I want to thank many of my former colleagues and my successor as District 8 Councillor in bringing this important matter forward. It's certainly something that we've spent a long time working on, both in the public and the private sector, and particularly Councillors Bach and O'Malley for this hearing order. It's timely, it's on point, and it coincidentally goes well with my new endeavor that I'm working on, Housing Forward Massachusetts, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to removing obstacles, regulatory obstacles to affordable housing, workforce housing development across the Commonwealth. Obviously, Boston is very important to us. And we've heard already throughout this hearing countless stories. I experienced this quite a bit as a city councilor, as a chair of our housing committee, of good projects, affordable projects, middle income projects that were held up through lawsuits, through arcane zoning procedures, and that adds to the cost dramatically in materials and carrying costs and the soft costs, which can often make up between a fifth and a third of a project's cost, sometimes even higher for affordable developments. And it's incumbent upon cities and towns and, quite frankly, the state of Massachusetts to remove some of these obstacles. So I would say I agree with many of the proposals, and Housing Forward Mass has shared our sort of principles around zoning that we believe in with the panel that have been talked about today. So we need some change at the state level, but the idea of making all affordable projects as of right in most areas makes a lot of sense, especially when we're talking about not projects that aren't at high-rise level. So when we're talking about 5 or 6 story projects that make sense in central business districts, in areas that are transit adjacent, we need to be doing this. The process should not be this complicated, and quite frankly, I don't think it's acceptable as a matter of public policy, morality, or smart economic development to allow one individual butter to hold up what is otherwise a well-supported project that will solve a big problem for the community. So some of the changes that have already been talked about in this hearing, I wholeheartedly agree with. As I said, making very low income, other deed restricted projects as of right in most districts. Quite frankly, in the absence of massive federal funding, solving the affordable and workforce housing challenges is going to fall on cities and towns and states. And because we don't have a blank check the way the federal government does, we need to be smart about reducing regulation. And Councillor Ewan-Campen was mentioning this previously. We need to get out of the way, whether it's at the city or town level or at the statewide level. So we're excited to see some movement on this, certainly in the Boston City Council, our colleagues in Cambridge and Somerville, and at the State House. I'm happy to take any questions on the plans and proposals and goals of Housing Forward and how we can be helpful in doing this, because not only are we interested in developing and proposing model policy proposals, but we also want to help organize and make sure that these goals are achieved in city and town halls and at the State House in Massachusetts. So I want to thank you for your courtesy and letting me speak here, Councillor. This is not exactly the way I envisioned my return to the council chamber to be when we left in January. I do look forward to all of us being back in that building again soon. Thank you.
As we look to make changes at either the zoning code or through the zoning commission, are there other sort of aspects that we should be cognizant of going forward, or anyone want to sort of jump in on that?
Sure, if I can briefly, Councillor. I think a lot of it's been said already, but the underlying issue is, and I will quote Councillor Ewan-Campen again, is that local government needs to remove whatever obstacles that can be to this, whether that's removing opportunities for lawsuits, whether it's speeding the review process. And listen, as I know my former colleagues understand, and our colleagues in Cambridge and Somerville, obviously neighborhood residents should and deserve a voice in development projects in their neighborhoods. But that cannot be an ultimate veto, particularly when it comes to much needed affordable housing. Creating more affordable housing, denser housing in our communities contributes dramatically to better outcomes around racial and social equity, around reducing carbon emissions, around basic economic development for our communities. And it's really critical that we do that. And if there are ways that we can fairly remove these, you've seen in other cities across the country, particularly recently in Oregon, of changing some of their zoning regulations to allow as of right more density. I'm sure earlier there was discussion of the Boston Indicators report that recently came out. This is very much a regional issue, but Boston can and should be leading the way. And I also think we're in a place where, there's a dramatic need for this, and there's an appetite for making these changes. And I urge everyone involved to seize that opportunity and make some really revolutionary change that will improve our communities for the future.
I do hear that from a lot of folks. There is this belief that because you're low income, you're undesirable, and therefore that's going to impact whether or not people want to live on the block that you are building low income housing. And so that's probably where I'm coming from, but I'm just curious.
Madam Chair, may I add to that? So, Councilor, it's a really important question. And in our research, and it's not certainly groundbreaking research, there's actually been a lot of good, more widespread publicity on these issues recently, is that so much of zoning was initially developed in this country to be racially and economically exclusionary. And while it may not explicitly have that goal in this day and age, the effects are still very much there. So obviously this is about Boston, the city of Boston, which is an incredibly diverse community, and we should be building housing for all types of folks, all from all backgrounds. And once you get out of the city and out of Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville, it's even more stark. Sort of the really explicitly exclusionary goals of zoning policy, and you see that every day in the access to educational opportunities, to jobs, to good, affordable, and middle-income housing. So it absolutely needs to be addressed, and I think you're 100% right to call it out in this forum, as it should be, I think, in any forum where housing and zoning is being discussed. We need to be more thoughtful about it. Allowing the creation of denser housing in the city and across the state goes a huge way to address some of these issues, and it's time we did that. And before we close, I know in the interest of time, I'll be very brief here, is that I think Molly was mentioning this earlier in response to one of Councilor Mejia's comments, is that we need to also be thinking about the entire housing ecosystem and what affordable means. Councilor Bach was talking about deeply affordable, subsidized, deed-restricted housing, which is of critical need in the city of Boston and really across the Commonwealth. But another important piece of the puzzle, though, is allowing smaller developers, even for-profit developers, to get through this process a little quicker and a little less of a costly manner, because a lot of those projects that they're being built are the middle-income housing stock that is the city of Boston needs. If we have these unpredictable zoning processes, if we require folks to go through years-long permitting and then be subject to lawsuits, it just dramatically raises the cost. So when we think about this, let's think about the big, all affordable projects for sure, but also thinking about some which may be technically market rate, but are the types of housing that are more accessible to people at middle and lower incomes in the city of Boston. And with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to join you all today to share some of my thoughts and the positions of Housing Forward Massachusetts, and look forward to continuing our work on this project, on these goals, and being helpful in any way that we can. Thank you.